Hello, I've been instructed today that I'm to explain to you all how we came about discovering that we are a system. Um, so, how it started out, they made notes. Um, First of all, we knew something was different from when we were, well, for as long as any of us can remember. To us, it seems like childhood, but physically, the body was like 7th grade. But that's as old as any of us can remember. Um, but we knew something was different because we knew we had like a world in our head that we could go to and leave this world and go live there when we wanted to. And there were people there, and complex worlds with, all these interacting factors. Very, just very intricate, rich world. And we understood we came to understand that was not how normal people's imaginations worked, and which is what we had thought for most of our life. The other thing we noticed was that we could sort of project what we came to know as our alters outside the body. Now, this is different from hallucinations in that physically we do not see them there. We can tell that they are not there, yet we would interact, gesture, speak to them, like turn our heads towards them like we were speaking to them, like they were outside the body. And it's almost like the augmented reality, where it's not real, but you sort of have an overlay of a fictional world on top of the real world. And that's what it was like for us, that we could project some of the alters into the external world to interact with them. But it's very much like augmented reality now. From there, since we had figured something was different, we began researching, which eventually led us to information about maladaptive daydreaming, which we haven't studied that far because it's not our actual diagnosis, but it's all about sort of the escapism, and they have worlds inside their heads with complex storylines. And so we were like, that explains the inner world. So that was the best we had found. But it wasn't a perfect fit. And the main thing we noticed about that was that with maladaptive daydreaming, from what we understand, the person who is doing it can sort of manipulate the daydream. And if they want someone to do something, that can happen. Whereas with us, we could, in our inner world, if we were to try to will one of the other alters to do something, it achieved nothing. It would be like attempting mind control out here. You achieve nothing. So that was... it was as close as we could find, but it certainly wasn't a perfect fit. And at that point, we just accepted not knowing. And we sort of figured, whatever it is, it's clearly weird. That's what we thought. And we're all so used to it. It wasn't doing us any harm. It was just like, why are we different than everyone? We wanted answers, but not necessarily a cure. So we sort of just dropped it because it wasn't achieving anything. Then many years later down the line, what started the whole thing of actually finding out what was wrong with us. This is going to seem silly, but we were watching the BBC series Sherlock, and we saw the scenes where he's in his mind palace, and there's Moriarty and Molly and John and his brother, and we saw that is what our life is like. That's what the world inside our head looks like. I mean, not exactly, but that's how it works, is what we were trying to say. And we were watching it with one of our friends, and we just pointed at the screen and we're like, that is what I've been trying to explain my whole life. And they just looked at us like we had lost our minds. And so we didn't really talk about it after that. We did a bit of research from Sherlock. He'd called it Mind Palace, so we started researching the Mind Palace and saw that was how you could store memories there. And it was usually objects stored memories. And we saw, well, not exactly. It's more like people storing traits, was how in trying to draw parallels, that's how we saw it. And we're like, that's not quite right either. Then, because we'd already seen Sherlock behave, or seen his head, and we were determined to find out what that was that we saw. So we started looking for sort of like professional psychologists, like character analysis of Sherlock from the BBC series. And someone mentioned that, and somewhere far down an internet wormhole or rabbit hole, we found a fan theory that Sherlock was suffering from multiple personality disorder. From there, we started Googling multiple personality disorder. That led us to the YouTube channel of Multiplicity and Me. And that was when everything clicked. And it was like, this is what we have been living with our entire lives. And it was just so many things clicked into place. Everything she was saying was stuff we'd experienced, and it was explaining so many of our unanswered questions that we'd had for our entire life. Some of the biggest things that we found after finding out what it was we noticed that, like, yes, we were, like, losing time, but we thought that was normal. We just thought we had a bad memory. We didn't have any childhood memories, and we thought, well, most people forget their childhood, but we couldn't remember anything. We thought we had very inconsistent preferences. One day we would like one style or music taste, and the next day we'd like another one, and we just thought, oh, we're very, our taste is very eclectic. We'd thought that, the bad memory, we had been accused of being bipolar because we would change our mood, very quickly, which we now know was switching, and, Kiyoshi has some major depressive issues, so he had symptoms of that, and Anastasia, as she's a child, is somewhat hyperactive, but that's just because she's a child, and so that was understood as, like, the mania, and so people thought we had bipolar disorder. We were constantly having to negotiate with each other. which we somehow thought was normal. We thought it was just like, the angel and the devil on your shoulder of what should you do versus what you want to do, and all the cartoons depict the person actually having the conversation with these people, and to us, we were just like, oh, that is, it's just my conscience I'm talking to. So once we had a name for it and a diagnosis, we were like, here's what it's been, and all these things we'd been accepting as normal or ignoring or not even noticing we were doing, all clicked into place with, yes, we do every single one of these. And then about 2 years later, we were at this point on our third therapist, and we'd already sort of diagnosed ourselves with this because we'd spent, a decade researching this, trying to figure out what was wrong with us. And so at that point, we were fairly sure we had at least a decent amount of knowledge about the subject matter. And so we started bringing up some of the symptoms in our therapy sessions. The bad memory, the feeling like you need to negotiate with others, in order to sort of hint, because I don't want this to come across as like manipulating your therapist, but oftentimes if you walk in with like, this is what's wrong with me, if they don't, our experience with doctors is generally if you do that, they don't believe you. So we didn't exaggerate anything or lie, we were just, the things that we had thought were normal and never bothered bringing up, we would slide them into conversation, and we never brought up the words of any sort of dissociative disorder or multiple personality disorder. We never said any words from it, because we were self-aware of the fact that what if this is like a hypochondriac thing and we're making this up? And so the thinking was that we came to the conclusion on was, if the therapist independently comes to the same conclusion, then we will believe it. And he did, and then we ended up later on getting our official diagnosis. But that was the long, oh god, how many years? Let's see. Let's just call it a lifelong thing, because we recently told our mother that we had the condition, and she said, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because apparently, when we were a small child, we always had... She of course thought it was imaginary friends, but they had names and we would have to negotiate with them. And, they had their inner world life stories going on, and we had this as a kid, and when we were an older child, we still had it, still had these imaginary friends, and even now we have the same thing and the same traits, and we've had the same memory issues our whole lives, and we've had the same sort of inconsistent, eclectic personality. So when we spoke out about it, people around us were able to be like, yeah, you do this, this, and this, you just don't remember it. And, you told us that there were people in your head, you just don't remember it. And that was, slightly terrifying to find out that anyone had ever told them without getting group consensus, but it is what it is, and we've had time to come to terms with our diagnosis. I haven't been able to do anything about it, but it's nice having the validation that this thing we've been dealing with forever. We're not making it up. It's not in our head. It's just nice knowing in a way that we're not completely insane. Because if other people have it, then it can't be as weird as we had originally thought it was. Because we thought it was just us, and that our brain was somehow broken. And finding out that there are other people who live like we do, regardless of if it's like helped in any tangible way, it's just very comforting to know that this was what was going on the whole time. I hope this was mildly educational. Like, subscribe to learn more about dissociative identity disorder and the lives we lead with it. I'll see you in some other video at some point in the future. Goodbye, and have a nice day.